And Smoke with Twisted Rico. I'm your host, Steve Ricardo. That rockin' track, which we feature in our intro and later our outro music, is none other than the title track of the Charm So Pretty EP from 2004. It's really hard to believe that that song is 15 years old, and it sounds more powerful than ever, as ever, I should say. It was actually recorded at the original New Alliance studio. I talked about this last time, the one on 1312 Boylston Street in Boston. And that's probably going to remain our intro music for a while because we love it so much. Okay, it's great to be back here in Union Square, Somerville, here at one of the coolest places in the world, the New Alliance Music and Art Complex. It's just awesome for me to come here every week to record. Hopefully we'll be doing something live soon as well. I hear there are some rumblings about that happening. Herb Morsiglio, who is sitting right in front of me, may have some news or feedback on that topic. Maybe I'll press him on that later because it would be awesome to do something live. Before we get to our very special guest, Greg Allen, before we get Greg on the air, I'd like to thank our patrons who have generously supported the podcast: Zach, Ellie, Chad, Maria, Lee, Matt, Sue, and Andy. And if you want to join this cool club and become one of our patrons, it's pretty damn easy. You can get us at the Patreon, patreon.com/Twisted Rico, and a mere $1 a month gets you on board. Without their support, they're helping me pay the bills to do this, so I appreciate all your help. Also, I want to send a shout out to and thank our model, the original Blowing Smoke model, Nina, for her continued support, including the video she made about the show. And by the time this show airs, there may be another video, which would be awesome because we love Nina. And one more. Also, I want to thank my good friend Heather in Denver, who has listened to every episode of Blowing Smoke with Twisted Rico. I just talked to her on the phone this morning. Makes me happy that she's such a fan. Heather and I met in Pittsburgh, where she was from, back in 1994 when I was on the road with the band Jacko Pierce. And we became friends and have remained friends ever since.
Heaven, or from 1977. She's kind of funny. All my friends think she's a dummy, but when I see her walking down the street, she opens her mouth, and before she can speak, I know she's stoned. Desire,
love that song. I love that track. That's She's Stoned from the Happiness on the Way CD album that Greg Allen's Fringe Religion recorded, which we will talk about shortly. I'm like very excited to have my friend and outstanding musician, songwriter, Greg Allen on the show today. Welcome, Greg. Long time no see.
Great seeing you again, Steve.
I think the last time I saw you, we were on a radio show together at the Crash Course for the Raver show with Brian Young.
Yeah, it was a trip. It's always a trip doing that show.
A few years ago.
Yep.
But I'm going to just run through your discography real quick, and then we can take it from there. So if I miss anything here, please let me know. 1983, Greg released the Blue Ruin 45. And then in 2004, there was a lot that happened between then, and we'll talk about that. But in 2004, the Greg Allen Group released Just For You. Also around, I think it was maybe 2005, I didn't write the date down, Let's Pretend.
Yeah, that was a weird album. Night Bob from Aerosmith did engineered that.
Greg Allen's Charm School was the band at that time. And of course, the prolific Jerry Nolan and the Profilers' final recordings, which we could talk about because that took a while to come out. And then Greg Allen's Fringe Religion released Elevator Girl / Queen of Dirt, which was recorded by John Taft at the second New Alliance location at the EMF building in Cambridge. And the latest release, Greg Allen's Fringe Religion, also Happiness Is on the Way, which was recorded by the legendary Paul Calderi at Verdant Studio in Vermont and is distributed through Bomp, like the Jerry Nolan and the Profilers record is. Greg also has tracks on tons of compilations, including the Twisted Rico Scandalous Years compilation, which has one of his biggest hits on it, Manic Boy. So did I get the whole discography right?
Pretty much, you did. There was a couple other ones in there that I produced the record out in New York, and it wasn't very successful. We recorded it out in, I can't remember, actually. It might have been on like Long Island, Babylon, some weird place. And I remember the review when the record came out had a big picture of us, and it said, "No mammy, Grammy." Or no Grammy, mammy, or something like,
I wanted to talk about this first because I know this is something that's close to your heart, and I know that it took you a while to make this happen. Tell our listeners about the process that went through getting the Jerry Nolan, the Profilers record out. People don't know Jerry Nolan was in the New York Dolls. Greg was the singer of Jerry Nolan, the Profilers, and it took a long time to happen. Can you just tell us about that whole process?
From the beginning, the inception
Yeah,
of the
sure.
recording. We were playing around New York. I had a band at the time, and we'd open shows for Jerry and Sil. And then Jerry quit the band that he was doing with Sylvain called The Ugly Americans. And then I saw him one day hanging around, and he's like, "Oh, what are you doing?" I said, "Nothing." He said, "I'd like a band." And, we became friends. And he moved in, stayed at my place for a while when I was living on First and First. And then one day somebody called me and said, I was going to do a demo recording in Boston. And he heard me on the phone talking to a drummer up in Boston up here. And he said, "Why didn't you ask me to play?" And I'd never really thought about it. So I said, "Oh, that'd be great." I didn't think you'd be interested in playing on any of my stuff, He said, "Of course, I like the music." So we started recording. Being Chicago Vinny, who recently passed away, but Jerry got sick, and he passed away, after we'd been recording for a couple months. So I didn't want to do anything with the record for years. I just left it. And oddly enough, I had this coffin as a coffee table in my apartment in New York, and I left the tapes in there for years. And then I figured, well, might as well put them out, And when we tried to make the tapes, to print them, well, the tapes started falling off the reels because they were so old. So we had to literally bake them like you're baking a cake. And they did that process in Newport, Rhode Island. And so we baked them, we put them out, burned them once, and, kind of overdubbed a few things. And the tracks we could save, we released on vinyl. So
From the time that you finished that till the time it was released through Bomp, how long did that take?
Like 20 or 30 years or something. I had it for
long
so
time.
long. And then Bomp decided they'd distribute it for us, and Kudos did the same for us in England. Their digital distribution. So it was a long, tedious, and expensive process. And a lot of people like that record. It's a little.
You wrote the songs, right?
I did, yeah. I wrote all the stuff on that. And Jerry liked the material, and we were going to do more stuff. And, he had talked about maybe going to Japan and Australia and doing some shows. But he got sick and passed away. And I figured it's more of a document than anything. It's not like some brilliant recording. It's just that's what happened at that time. And we used it, just to kind of say, hey, this is the last stuff we ever did.
Now, you grew up in Providence?
I grew up outside Providence in a town called East Greenwich.
And then how old were you when you went to New York?
Early 20s, maybe 23 or so, when I moved there and lived in this horrendous welfare hotel on 17th Street, filled with cockroaches and prostitutes. And
Sounds like 17th Street.
Yeah, 17th and 3rd Avenue. And it was, pretty squalid. But, that's the only option I had for...
I think I probably talked to you about this before, but I lived on 10th Street in between 1st and 2nd, and that was in 86 and 87. I used to go to downtown Beirut, the bar there, which had the best jukebox around. And so we kind of lived in the same neighborhood, but you weren't there at that. You were there later than that, right?
There about 84, 85.
Oh, before I was there, you
Perhaps,
were there.
yeah. I got a job working at Tower Records where I get fired on a daily basis. And I just go in there, and every day they're like, get out, And I'd be like, what? Because I do weird stuff.
Don't we have a connection through that, Holly
Yeah,
Lane?
Holly.
Charles, her husband, used to...
Yeah, I used to hang out with them. Holly wound up working for Blackheart Records, Joan Jett's label. She was like president of Blackheart, or vice president.
Yeah, we worked together at Roadrunner Records. That's how I met Holly. And I don't think she was at Blackheart, but Mechanic is what I think you might be thinking of, Mechanic Records. But she's been in the industry for like a long time, and I knew that we had a mutual friend in her.
Yeah, I like Holly.
So while you were in New York, You've told me some really good stories. Now, weren't you involved with somebody from the David Johansen band for a while?
Well, I played with Buzz Verno and Johnny Rayo. And Johnny I've known for a long time. And what had happened was we ran an ad. A friend of mine ran an ad looking for a guitar player like Mick Ronson and Jeff Beck and Johnny Rayo. Johnny Rayo's not, as popular as Jeff Beck or Mick Ronson. And Johnny Rayo answered the ad.
You must have loved that.
His brother answered the ad and showed up. I wasn't there. I was at home. And so, Johnny Rayo actually showed up here at our, to play a jam with us. I said, oh, that's cool. I always loved his guitar playing. And
did you have to call Mick Ronson up and say, I'm sorry, Mick, we don't need you right now?
No, we never got any phone calls from
Rayo.
Mick Ronson. However, Johnny worked with Mick Ronson on the second Johansen album. Mick Ronson produced that.
Nice.
And so
Johnny, that's right, he did.
And so Johnny worked with him before. Anyway, as it turns out, Johnny and I became friends, and we did some recording. Great guitar player, great guy. I just did a song on Tommy Price's solo album. Tommy Price from Joan Jett's band.
Of the Joan Jett and the Blackhearts.
They had a band called Downtown Phantom, or still do. It's Tommy Price, Johnny Rayo, and the bass player from Mink DeVille's band. And they did one of my songs on their record just maybe a year ago, which was nice of them. And anyway,
they recorded one of your tracks.
I'm sorry?
They recorded one of your tracks.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, called escapes me at the moment.
I love when songwriters forget the songs that they wrote.
Sometimes it takes, you write them like 10 or 20 years ago, you don't remember them if you haven't played them. I'm Living With Your Ghost was the name of the song. And,
I like that title.
And so Johnny and I did the Just For You album, and we recorded that in Providence. And we did a bunch of stuff in Staten Island, too, that I'm going to release, demos that we did of some great songs that were recorded back in the day.
When did you blow out of New York and move up to Boston?
When I was broke. Pretty much got to the point where I was like, I'm older now. I'm working as an art handler in Manhattan. In fact, I worked with Johnny as an art handler. Strangely enough, we both got fired, of course.
You've gotten fired a lot.
Yeah, it's a requisite thing. I go in, they fire me, I come back the next day.
I'm a musician, man.
Yeah,
they don't. What do you expect?
Right, So I was working as an art handler, and I'm like, wow, this, I'm like 9,000 years old, and all the other kids are like 20.
By the way, Greg is not 9,000 years old because I'm older than him, and I'm not 9,000, although I feel it sometimes, I
was getting a little older at the time. So, I said, I got to do something. So came back to Rhode Island and, I had gotten arrested too. It's a long story. And
Every week we talk about someone getting arrested on our show, don't we, Herb?
This was absolutely absurd, the reason. But anyway, so I went back and I got a paralegal degree in criminal justice and blah, 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 which I...
Really? From what school?
CCRI in Rhode Island.
Nice.
I had gone to School of Visual Arts in Manhattan, but of course I could never make the classes because there were night classes, and who wants to go to the, you want to go out and drink.
Not in New York.
Yeah, there's no way you want to go to school at night in Manhattan.
Did you start playing right away when you moved up here? What year was that around? Do you have any idea?
When I moved to New York or Boston?
No, Boston.
I've been here for about 10 years, maybe a little longer. I didn't play immediately. I was trying to, I don't know what happened at first. I can't remember what was going on. I mean,
when you put out the Just for You and Let's Pretend, that was...
I was still in New York, and that was recorded in Rhode Island.
One of those albums, and forgive me for not knowing which one, didn't you cover The Neighborhood's Prettiest Girl?
Yeah, that was on the Just for You album. The guys listened to it in the car, and they came back in and go, we got it, and we just recorded it in one take. It was a great song. Neighborhood's one of my favorite bands, and we used to play a lot with them in Providence when I was younger, in my early 20s, and we'd open shows for them, and that was just, it's one of the, best songs, local bands, Boston local songs, in years. There's been plenty, but that's one of the top ones.
And you've gone through, well, you're not the only one. You've gone through quite a few musicians in your band since you moved up here. And I know that a couple of lineups lasted a little while because I remember seeing, when you had Chicago Vinny, who you mentioned earlier, who passed away. I was sorry to hear about that. He was kind of a legendary guy. You guys worked together before that in New York, right?
Yeah, we did. With the Profile, the Jerry Nolan stuff.
Oh, he was on the Pro.
He played bass on that. We couldn't find a bass player. We could find a few, but Jerry didn't care for him, so we asked if I knew anyone, and I knew Vin from Rhode Island, and so I called up Vin, and he was more than happy to come down, and him and Jerry got along great. And
yeah, I was sorry to hear about his passing.
Yeah, I didn't. It was pretty unexpected, quick.
And then the last record you recorded, Happiness is on the Way. I wanted to talk about this one because it just came out really
last year, I think.
Late
yeah,
last year.
We're going to be working on something new soon.
Now, this is interesting because you went up to record with another Boston guy who has a studio in Vermont, Pete Weiss. Everyone knows Pete.
Yep.
But you had Paul Calderi, the legendary Hole, Belly, all these huge bands from the 90s. How did that come together where you got Paul to record?
I mean, I'd known his wife for a long time.
Robin Vaughn.
And it was, I can tell you a little story about it if you have a minute.
Yeah, we got a minute.
The first time I met Paul, I worked at this music store in Rhode Island, in Newport, when I was going back at school. And this guy used to come in all the time, and we'd have all this vintage gear, and I'd go, check out this Fender twin amp from 1960. And he'd go, I got one of those. Then he'd come in the next week, and I'd go, look at these Gretsch guitars. And he goes, I got 3 of them. And then he'd come in like a week later, and I go, okay, we've got 4 Pro Reverbs from 1963. And you go, yeah, I got a bunch of them. I go, who is this nut? So finally I called my friend in Boston. I said, this crazy guy comes in all the time. And every time I say, we got this cool gear, he's got 4 or 5 of them. This is absolutely insane. And I go, okay. She goes, well, all right, well. I said, do you know this guy, Paul? She's like, no. And anyway, we did a show and at PA's Lounge. Yeah. And we came up from Rhode Island because I had to be playing while I was still in school just because you got to do that. And so Paul shows up with Robin Vaughn, who I'd known for a while, lovely Robin.
Great writer.
And I'm like, oh, my God, there's that guy who owns all that equipment. And every time he comes into the store, he's got 90. I'm thinking, this guy. And so Robin goes, my husband produces bands. I'm like, yeah, I'm sure he does, I didn't know who he was. And so finally, I'm like, oh, my God. So I called Chris Toppin again. I said, this guy, showed up, and he's the guy who says, hey, has all these amplifiers and these vintage Fender guitars.
Right.
She goes, that's Paul Calderi. He's one of the biggest producers in the, ever.
In the 90s,
and I felt like an idiot, But, as it turned out, we became friends, and he asked me if I was ready to do some recording, and we were, and we just had got a new drummer, and we recorded all that stuff in a day. And, Pete engineered everything.
Right.
And I got really good reviews, across the country. And it's cool. I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah, so, working with Bomp must be cool because they're one of the all-time great, garage punk labels.
Sure.
Greg Shaw, he's Susie, no longer with us, and his wife, Susie. I knew Betsy Palmer, who used to work there, and her band, the Ronchettes, was on Bomp in the old days. And then she did another project with Brett from Bad Religion. It escapes me right now. I'm sorry, it escapes me. But Bomp has had a great history. How did you get hooked up with them? Was it the Jerry Nolan record that opened the doors?
Probably, yeah. I think I'd sent her a handwritten letter, this ridiculous thing like, "We love Bump. We'd like to be on your label." Just insane, scribbled. And then, and here's my email address. And she's like, "Oh, thanks for the letter." And I said, "Well, I played with Jerry Nolan, and, we're looking for some distribution to put these limited edition vinyl copies out." She was like, "Let me check it out." So I sent it to her, and she was like, "Oh, I wouldn't mind doing this, distributing
Nice.
it." And then I sent her some of my own stuff, and she goes, "I like your music, so it's cool." And so we have a, good relationship. She's a great lady, and I love that, company. We're not exclusively on her label. We're just, we have distribution.
Believe me, having distribution to them is great. I just want to go back to Paul Calderi for a second because I had to pull up his Wikipedia page because
done a
these
lot
are
of
the
stuff.
bands that he's worked with. You ready? Pixies, Radiohead, Orangutan, Hole, Dinosaur Jr., Julian Hatfield, Wax, Warren Zevon, Uncle Tupelo, Throwing Muses, Morphine, the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, the Go-Go's, Mike Gordon of Fish. That's just to name a few.
I know.
Him and Sean Slade.
He's done hundreds of records, and either engineering or producing. And he's great, and he's a great guy, too.
So, I mean, we listen to the song She's Stoned. I love it. I like that little bridge that is in the middle of it. That's cool. And the guitar lead on that sounded a little familiar.
That's Pete Weiss, and I think Paul had suggested, I might have brought it up at first, that whole song is pretty much plagiarized. I mean, everything on that is sort of like, there's a little bit of like the Cars there, there's a little bit of Lou Reed, there's a little bit of
Greg doesn't care if you get sued, I
Van
guess.
Halen, there's a little bit of Blondie. Well, it was all kind of like, I wanted to make an album, this record, it was all kind of tongue-in-cheek, this particular
It's like a new
record.
wave record.
It's a bizarre thing. It's sort of like all the songs are kind of quirky and like not, too serious. And so Paul said, "You know what? Why don't we throw in the Cars solo for Best Friend's Girl, like at the end of the song," which Pete Weiss, played brilliantly. And that's how that appeared.
We were talking about Rick Ocasek a couple weeks ago, man. I'm sure that you have been influenced by his music, but so many people have. You don't realize till someone passes away what their body of work is like. Not just the Cars records and his solo records, but he did like Weezer and so many really cool bands, And I mean, did that when that happened? Were you?
I was kind of shocked. It seems to be, more frequent with the girl from the Muffs passing away.
Yeah.
She was great. And, it's just kind of a bummer. He did the Degeneration album, which was a New York band, and that sounded great. That was a great sounding record. And, he's did a lot of great work, and it's a shame, but people get
We're
older.
all gonna
and
die. I know I said that last time, but so before we talk about some fun other stuff that I got planned for us, what are your future plans right now? Is it still Greg Allen's Fringe Religion? Is that? I know you had to cancel a bunch of shows because your drummer moved or something, but have you been able to come up with a future plan?
Yeah, it took a while. We got a great new drummer named Jeff Larson, and a guitarist named Corey Wells, who just moved from Texas here. He's fantastic. And Greg Steinbaugh's playing bass. And we've been rehearsing. We're about ready to record and play out again. And the band sounds fantastic. And we had to take some time off because our drummer found another job out west in Arizona. And like within a month, he had sold his condo and moved out there. And we had about 20 shows booked from here. We were going to go out to L.A. and we were going to go out to Philly and stuff, and we had to cancel everything. And then in the process,
that stinks.
Yeah, so it took a while to find another drummer.
I always blame the drummers for everything. Anyway,
It's always their fault. It's their fault if you play crappy on stage. It's their fault if you're late for band practice.
Although
like the kick dog, for anybody's anxiety issues.
A lot of bands go through. A lot of bands go through a lot of drummers, although I got to tell you, the Charms that I managed for a long time, they've had like 12 different bass players. So, I mean, it's the whole rhythm section, man.
It's a Spinal Tap world,
And, bass is actually my favorite instrument in the band. When I heard, guys like Jack Bruce and John Entwistle and John Deacon from Queen, I realized, and Paul McCartney, of course. And then I could name all current bass players, but bass kind of really has always been my thing. So I'm not going to be too hard on the bass players. Drummers,
we got a great bass player,
Cool.
The Answer Man.
So now I'm going to shift gears, and we're going to have a little fun because I always like to, throw something fun in. Before we do that, though, what are you listening to these days? I mean, is there something that's been local or national or anything that's come out lately that's actually, or you like me and you find yourself going back to the library a lot?
Both. I've been listening to the Scanners. They have a new record out. They're pretty cool. And this band called, I think they call the Schizophonics, and they had a couple cool songs. You ever heard them?
Yeah.
So that's like newer stuff. And I'm a product of my generation, so I'm back there in the 70s and 60s stuff. And I like a lot of new music. It's just flooded. So sometimes if I'm listening to some college local stations, I just won't know because they really don't tell you this is by so and so. You have to wait till the end of the program to hear who's done it. But there's some really cool music out there.
I remember from when we were neighbors in Somerville near Davis Square, going to your house. You and Heather, your lovely wife, Heather,
Yeah.
I love, great artist. I hear it's her birthday. Happy birthday. She won't get this wish on the podcast for a few weeks, but happy birthday. Greg, and Heather, their record and book collection especially. I mean, they had, did you still have all that stuff?
Yeah, I've got tons of, it's like really almost, it's
You
weird.
gave me another book a while ago, and I can't remember what it is, but today.
It was Patty Boyd.
Patty Boyd's book. Well, you have a good memory. How in the world do you
I
remember
don't know.
that?
It's weird.
Are you waiting for me to return that book?
No, you can hang on to it. It's been a while.
I think
it's yours
I
now.
lifted this-
Even legally, it's yours too.
I think one of my ex-girlfriends confiscated that book like they confiscate all my rock T-shirts and stuff. But Greg gave me a Queen book today about the early days of Queen. I can't wait to start reading that.
We still have tons of, I read every idiotic rock book known to mankind. I'm presently reading the one on the Hollywood Brats, which were as close to Spinal Tap as you can get. Very kind of Bowie-ish, Dolls-ish band from London. Very hilarious book. I read a book on Alex Chilton last month.
Oh, that's cool. See, I like as far as documentaries go too, I could watch a documentary about a band I don't even like, and it'll be interesting to me, so I can relate to that. Like I've read a lot of books. Like I'm not a big Ozzy fan. I'm reading his book.
That book is great.
I mean, but not as good as Tony Iommi. And
I haven't seen it.
I read his book and Glenn Hughes because he talks about Sabbath a lot too. But okay, we're gonna do a little fun. Sometimes I don't tell people what I'm gonna ask them, but I had to do this because I wanted Greg.
Not going to bring up that
his notes.
cross-dressing issue, I hope.
No, but I did prep you a little bit. So before we start, I thought it would be cool to talk about some of your favorite records of all time. So I asked you to put together a list, and I see that I said 10, Greg, and that looks like an
I
encyclopedia.
can't
over
possibly
there.
come up with 10 albums.
But I made my top 10 list, so I have to tell you my top 10 list first. For years, I was unable to update my top 10 list, and it usually had like 2 Queen and 2 Beatle albums on it every time. But I've managed, and it also had Pink Floyd Animals on it every time. But now I've managed to limit my list and change it, and I only have 1 Queen record and 1 Beatles record.
Wow.
I had to put Queen Sheer Heart Attack on my list because it's my favorite record ever, period. Bar none. My second is the White Album. I mean, I love the White Album, even though the record got panned by a lot of people.
Great.
Because it was like 4 guys that weren't in the same band, but somehow Eric Clapton and I think Billy Preston and other people showed up, to record. My third record that I put on the list, I kind of modernized my list a little bit is Arcade Fire, The Suburbs. The more I listen to that record, the more I love it. It's just one of the best records, I think, that's come out in the last 20 years. PJ Harvey, Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea. I like a lot of her records, but that's my favorite. And then I have a Social D record, White Light, White Heat, White Trash, because I love Mike Ness's songwriting. A lot of the themes of his music are the same about recovery and how he was You asked if we could swear on the show before. I'm going to drop the F-bomb. He was a fuck up, and how he redid his whole life and everything. So I love that.
I just saw an interview with him or something, and he seems like a real interesting guy.
I really like Mike Ness a lot. I put the first Cars record on, which I don't think ever made my top 10 list, but Bye Bye Love and All Mixed Up and great record. And then the first Pretenders record, which unfortunately they never were able to. Greg Shomi has that on his list,
Yes,
but that's
I do, in the top
there
10.
was bound to be some cross collateralization.
There is, and also, as you can see, Sheer Heart Attack by Queen.
Don't show me your list. He just showed me
Just a
his
couple
list.
of them. I've got a lot lot of information on here.
I'm trying to go as fast as I
All right.
can. I got more than 10 here, though. Liz Phair, Exile in Guyville, one of the
Great
best
record.
records ever made. I put one of my bands on here. I usually don't do that, but I listen to the Charms Pussycat record so much that I can't not have it in my top 10.
Another great band.
I had to put a Dylan record on because we share the same birthday. I almost did Planet Waves, which is the band with the record we recorded with the band, but I went for Blood on the Tracks because Tangled Up in Blue is so great. And then Buzzcocks, I put all three of their records. They all were recorded in 78, 79. Another Music in a Different Kitchen, Love Bites, and A Different Kind of Tension. And then my last actually I put two of her records on. Lucinda Williams, Essence, and Car Wheels on a Grave Road. So, I mean, there's other records that I could have put on my list.
The diverse selection you have.
A lot, but I tried to do something different here. Like when I put Lucinda on here, I was like, yeah, but don't you like Steve Earle more than Lucinda? And I was thinking, you know what, I'm going to go with Lucinda this time, you know, because they're kind of.
I got all the Steve Earle stuff too.
They're in the same category, I think,
Yep.
you know, like Americana.
Yeah.
People think they're country, but they're more like Americana. So that's my list, Greg, and now we get to hear what you have in that encyclopedia. And I
Well-
would like to comment on some of these, if I
Sure.
may, as we
And
go along.
I'll give you like a little bit of insight of why I think, you know. But it's, you know, if you look at me and you look at the list, you go, gee, I'm shocked, you know. And so this is my top 10. I've got honorable mentions, too, of about 15 because it's impossible to encapsulate all this. My first one, of course, is the first New York Dolls album where it's Johansson screaming, yelling
Yep.
about some kind of social drama. And Johnny Thunder's guitar sounds like somebody pulling a fire alarm. And it's just brilliant.
One of the greatest records
It's
ever
just
made.
insane, and it's so screwed up. Yeah, I love that record. Of course, second would be, I don't know if there's any particular order, but Exile on Main
I
Street.
didn't do an order either.
Exile on Main Street, the Rolling Stones. When I first got it, I was like, this is horrible. When I was a little kid, I got it, I was like 11. And then after about 2 months, gradually, by a year after listening to it, I'm like, this is brilliant. Because they changed so radically when they did that record.
It's a brilliant, if I would have put a Stones record on, I would have probably, Goat's Head Soup, that's, is that the record that had Till the Next Time We Say Goodbye?
No, that's called It's Only Rock and Roll.
Oh, because I use that line at the end of my show every week.
Yeah.
It's only rock and roll. Okay,
Right.
but Goat's Head Soup was Angie, and
Yeah.
that was a good one too. But go ahead.
Heartbreaker and...
Yeah.
So, Exile on Main Street would be second. And, of course, Tommy Bolin teaser. Tommy Bolin was the most
love
underrated
Tommy
guitar
Bolin.
player, singer, songwriter, guitarist to ever walk. You know, he did like 10
Purple.
albums before he was 25 years old.
His
did-
Deep Purple.
He played in
times,
Deep Purple, replacing
amazing.
Blackmore. He played in James Gang. He played in that band Zephyr from Colorado. He played with...
He's from Cleveland, right, Tommy?
no, he's from Colorado.
Oh, Colorado. Okay.
No, wait, hang on. Oh, God.
I always thought he was an Ohio guy, but
No,
I
he's
could be
not. He's
wrong.
from... I'm trying to think. This is so...
It's not important.
Well, it is sort of. Anyway, so we did like, we did Billy Cobham records. Fantastic record. The Tommy Bolin teaser album has so much diversity on it. Before Jeff Beck did his fusion stuff, he's got that. He's got songs that are very country, some reggae stuff. Just a great record. Anyway, after that, Replacements, Let It Be.
Oh, that could have been on
Brilliant.
my list.
Brilliant record. Sex Pistols, of course, never mind the Bullocks, where Steve Jones plays bass and guitar and everything brilliantly. It's amazing how good he is. Then we got like Iggy and Stooges' Raw Power and New Values. I can't figure out which is better because
Which one had 5'1" on it?
that's New Values. I think.
love that song.
Yeah, and Raw Power had Search and Destroy. Lou Reed, Transformer.
Nice.
Mott the Hoople, Mott. Of course, Johnny Thunder's So Alone. Great record. Has Steve Marriott on it. Phil
Can I
Lynott,
just stop
Chrissy
you for a
Hines. Sure.
second? I feel like a complete idiot because All American Alien Boy by Ian Hunter is not on my list because
Another great
Irene Wild is like my favorite
Yeah.
song ever.
That's a great song. Then my last one of my top 10 would be what you said, the first Pretenders album.
Why do you have a whole nother list on
Because
another
I just
piece of
got
paper?
riddled with anxiety. And I figured, well, you know what? It doesn't stop here. So I'm going to do this quickly, so not to torture anybody any longer, particularly you. My
No,
honorable
it's-
mention stuff is MC5, Kick Out the Jams, or Back in the USA. The Real Kids' second album, I believe, Out
Yeah.
of Place. The first David Johansen album, which has Joe Perry on it and Johnny Ray, of course. Great record. Ramones' Rocket to Russia. Humble Pie, Rockin' the Fillmore.
I love Steve Marriott.
Yeah, he's fantastic. Big Star's first album. David Bowie, Aladdin Sane. Kinks, Everybody's in Showbiz. Queen, Sheer Heart Attack.
Good
a
one.
band called Rhino Bucket. Get used to it.
Rhino Bucket.
I love
know
them.
that
They're
band.
like
They
an
sound like
AC/DC.
AC/DC,
They are
right?
brutal. This album's fantastic because it's just
Wow,
hilarious. Get
Rhino
used to it,
Bucket.
Rhino Bucket. Chris Spedding's. I think this is Chris Spedding's first album called Hurt. Fantastic. The Muffs, Blonder and Blonder, a great record.
Big Mouth is on that, right?
Agony's on it.
Yeah, I like them.
Yeah. And Rocket from the Crypt, which were a band that I really
Yep.
liked back in the day, is Scream, Dracula, Scream. Marshall Crenshaw, Downtown. And the
Songwriter.
Only Ones, one of my favorite underrated bands, English band.
What was that big hit they had?
Another Girl, Another Planet.
That's a
Replacements
great
did it.
song.
They toured with The Who here back in the 70s, and they were a great band. Peter Parrott, and the second record's called Even Serpents Shine, and that's a great album, too. And that's...
This is the perfect guy, by the way, Greg Allen, to do something like this with, because he's like an encyclopedia of music to begin with. So
We had this friend in New York, Charles Persavinsky, who was actually a walking, talking encyclopedia of music, and we play rock trivia with him when we'd get drunk, and then I'm sitting on the stoop and stuff. And then when he get all the answers, we'd start lying and tell him they're not the answers. We go, Elvis recorded this song in 1962 with a 4-track recorder. Who was the keyboard player? And he'd go, Ed Tingelman, 1963, played keyboards on Elvis. I'd go, wrong. I'd go, it was Billy Preston. Billy Preston wasn't even alive then, this kind of stuff. I go, you're lying. By the end of the night, somebody's holding the guy by both arms, because we just said, but he was a genius at that stuff.
I used to be able to remember everything, but my memory is just not that great anymore to remember every detail about every record. But listen, Greg, thank you very much for
Been a
coming
pleasure.
on Blowing Smoke with Twisted Rico. I would love to have you up here again, maybe as kind of sitting here when we're interviewing someone else. When the right person comes along, we'll have you on.
Love to do it.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
We'd like to thank our sponsor, JLS Design, 187 Main Street, Leicester, Mass., the Cherry Valley section of Worcester. They do custom screen printing and embroidery, a great place for bands to get all their T-shirts, hats, hoodies, etc. It's jlsdesignprinting.com. Their email is jlssales@gmail.com. I want to thank our engineer, Dorchester's own Herb Morsiglio, for manning the controls. And once again, thank you for listening to Blowing Smoke with Twisted Rico. And please consider supporting us for $1 a month on our Patreon page. Once again, it's www.patreon.com/Twisted Rico, where you can get exclusive updates, photos, etc. We want to keep this show going forever. So, till the next time we say goodbye, this is Blowing Smoke with Twisted Rico. I'm your host, Steev Ricardo. Keep the rock and roll alive.